Welcome into the K0LWC Ham Shack. Tonight, can we save ham radio clubs? Can they do it? Can we make them stay around? I think we have to. That's the topic of tonight's video. So you may be asking yourself, why is it important that we keep ham radio clubs around? Well, I think there's some key reasons. First off, you can't enjoy ham radio with absolutely no social interaction whatsoever. In fact, I know hams that are like that, and that's totally fine. But amateur radio clubs of all types play an important role. One of the most important roles that they play is they are the on-the-ground connective tissue in our local communities that are going to help promote ham radio and continue to grow this hobby. They also provide that in-person instruction, education, and help in terms of Elmering. And, somebody on the internet across the country is not going to help you put up your antenna when they live 1,000 miles away. That's just the reality. So having a network around you locally can really help, especially if you're a new ham. Now, thanks to the internet and social media, there's tons of information out there, easier than ever before to get those basic questions answered. But there's a good side and a bad side to that. Now, we'll talk about the distinction between general amateur radio clubs and then some more of the niche clubs like contesting clubs and others a little bit later on. But if you're just purely focusing on online content and that's your method of supporting ham radio and the folks that are putting out information about ham radio online, you're not supporting your local ham community as much, right? And there's repeaters to maintain. There may be, I said, funds that go through educational events in your community that go to recruit new hams. So if you're just giving money to people who are trying to separate you from your money, and that's their purpose, you're not helping ham radio right in your own backyard. And that's just another critical role of why ham radio clubs need to figure this out in the future. So now let's get into some of those ideas, the tips, tricks, and ideas that ham radio clubs can use right now today to figure out how they can evolve. Now, the first one is a pet peeve of mine, like a big pet peeve. If your website looks like it was coded for Angel Fire or GeoCities in the 1990s, it's time to redo that bad boy. I see this a ton in ham radio. Lots of horrible websites, MIDI music, the whole deal. You really need to have a modern website. And that comes also with evolving who's a part of your club. Some of the folks with those skills probably, maybe, might be generally younger. And we'll get in talking about youth here in a little bit as well. But having an up-to-date modern website, dedicate a communications officer. It's like ironic beyond all ironic that ham radio clubs, which were all about communication and passing traffic, really can't communicate very well a lot of the time. To me, it's not terribly surprising as a communicator by profession, but we need to figure out how do we designate and get out the correct information to the local ham community. There are so many gaps where people get in the hobby and they're like, what about this? Or this repeater's offline, or I was going to go to this breakfast and I was there and no one showed up, and they get disenfranchised. And then they're like, oh, well, I guess it's just not that active, and then they're out. And while you're in there working on that new modern website of yours for your club, think about how you're portraying your club to other members. And when I mean other members is, I don't mean the current members, your experienced hams. I'm talking about new hams that might be interested in joining, or people that don't have their license but have heard about ham radio and are intrigued by it. How are you talking to them? What does your website say? Do you have content that is written for them? Is it tailored to folks that have almost no idea what amateur radio is? That's actually one of the reasons why we started MinnesotaHamRadio.com. This website is really like an umbrella to all the other club websites in Minnesota. You can see we have Interested in Ham Radio, Learn More, main CTA right off the homepage. Very easy to navigate. This imagery, intentional. It's a younger ham radio operator here in the Twin Cities. That's on purpose. They can easily find a club in their area of the state, find active repeaters, nets, resources, events in their area. This really is designed to make them feel comfortable, to learn more about ham radio. What is it? Who are ham radio operators? Do you need a license? This may seem like basic stuff to us, and it is, but we can't take for granted that people know this stuff. They don't. It is our job to get them this information and start getting them interested and attracted to the hobby. People are looking for information like this, and I'll share a great story with you about this because it was just a fantastic story that happened here in Minnesota. We were putting on an event last year, and we put the call out and said, hey, if anyone's interested, come check out this event at a local barbecue joint. But we very explicitly and intentionally wrote the invitation to say, even if you're not licensed, even if you're just intrigued with radio or electronics, come to this meetup. We had people that showed up that were not licensed, that were newly licensed, that were studying, and they had all kinds of questions. We brought radios for them to check out and made recommendations on maybe some of the first ones to consider. It was fantastic. And when they showed up, they said, this explicitly called out that you're welcoming to anyone, including those that are not licensed. I'm not part of the club yet. I'm not an actual licensed operator yet, but you're not discriminating against me because I'm just interested or studying or have questions. That tells me everything I need to know about the gap that we need to fill in the ham community. Now, when you're in there updating your website, there's some other critical feature you need, and that is how can you, A, take an interest form or get communication from someone who's interested in your club? Number one, that's key. Two, probably more critical, can they sign up for membership right from your website? And if they are a current member, can they renew their membership dues on your website? If you are not doing electronic collection of funds, you are missing the boat. That is a huge problem. If I can just pop into your website, click PayPal, click, and I'm done, I am much more likely to stay a part of your club and also just generally be more active. Again, if you have an engaging and thoughtful website for what it's like to use the internet in 2023. So if you're saying, come to the meeting, bring me cash, bring me a check, for God bid, bring me a money order, stop. Just stop. Make sure your website can do that transaction. It's pretty easy to do. Now that we're done thinking about how you're going to communicate to potential new hams or hams that are already in your club with your new modern website, rewriting the content to be more about attracting new hams, think about, again, email newsletters, making sure it's consistent, fresh content. We have some clubs here in the Twin Cities that do a great job of this. But let's also talk about some other aspects. Let's get into the actual club meetings themselves. Now, if you have club business, right? Maybe you're a nonprofit, you have a secretary, a president, a vice president, people are calling motions, all that stuff, that's fine and well. Put the business of the club if you're structured that way. And by the way, just because you have a club like that doesn't mean that there can't be a club of another type that has no structure, no organization like that, but it's just a collective of people that collaborate together. That's very much how DMR is like here in Minnesota. There is no like set structure. It's just a collective of people that come together in the shared interest, which is totally still a club, but just not an official club. So if you have club business, put that at the end of the meeting. Don't make people sit through that because that's very boring, very dry. People aren't interested in motions and seconding motions. That's not fun. That's not interesting, especially if you're new. Put that at the end. If people get bored and leave, send out an email saying this is what happened. Keep everybody in the loop digitally that want to be in the loop. And as you're sitting around that table thinking about what your club's going to do to attract new hams, if you're not already doing educational events where you have training sessions on, technician level study classes, general level study classes, extra classes where you have experienced Elmers in your club teaching people that are interested in ham radio and getting their first tech license or even upgrading, start doing that right now. Major props to the Maple Grove Amateur Radio Club here in Minnesota, my home club where I live. They do a phenomenal job of this, and they really deserve a lot of credit. They have these classes all the time, and they have in-person classes. They have Zoom classes, so you don't have to physically actually attend. That's a key component that I think a lot of new people are looking for. So if your club isn't doing the education piece, that's a missed opportunity. Now, I mentioned earlier we're going to have some ideas on how do we infuse some younger membership into the club. Now, your club should be doing outreach to local high school science clubs or science departments, local Boy Scout troops, right? Figuring out how you can pull in more youth just to expose them to radio for the first time. Because not everybody like me growing up got experienced to radio as a kid, and that's just kind of how I got into it. Not everyone has that. We have to have that first part of the experience where they first get a taste of radio. And you say, oh, well, kids just have a cell phone. They're not going to care about it. That's not really true. It's just that radio was much more prolific when I was younger, I grew up in the 90s. And I wasn't even the heyday of a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was so culturally pervasive for ham radio in the 70s, 80s. I'm talking Smokey and the Bandit, baby. I'm talking CB radio, radio comms. There's a few decades where radio was huge. And it's been supplanted by other kinds of radios, the ones that we carry in our pockets every single day. But that doesn't mean that we can't still plant that seed with the kids. It's just they don't have that experience. So do that outreach, invite them to your club. But please don't invite them to sit there and listen to motions. That's not going to work. When they come in, think about how are you doing interactive demonstrations? Can they build something hands-on? Can your club dues go to that? Can you have them build a simple antenna, build a tape measure Yagi, something like that? Build a Pi computer. Granted, prices are out of control of that right now. But things like that that are interactive, and have that at the beginning of the meeting, particularly if you're inviting youth to your meeting. They have a pretty short attention span, thanks social media. But have that at the start and make it interactive. Some of the best clubs that I've seen, and shout out another club from where I used to live in Colorado, the Parker Amateur Radio Association, Parker, Colorado, does a phenomenal job of this. I've seen their posts on social media. I know some folks involved. They do an awesome job of this. It has to be interactive and learning focused. No one's coming for your coffee, no one's coming for your donuts, and no one's coming to listen to the politics of the club. Make it fun, educational, and interactive, and get youth involved. Now, I know what you're asking. Well, how do we get youth involved? Now, again, I think building anything like an antenna is super cool. But what about this? What if you did a fox hunt? And you can use traditional fox hunt stuff, put out a box and use the tape measure Yagi and have members of the club show them. But what about this? There are ways to do that where you actually just use cell phone apps, where you could put out like a router and then have them use their cell phone and body blocking to go and try to track down a router. That's a great use of new technology that they all have and can understand, but also makes the connection that that's still radio, because it is. They don't think of it as radio. They think of it as like wireless magic, but at the end of the day, that's RF and that's radio. So a fox hunt using smartphones. You can get really creative with the ideas you're doing of how to engage these folks. But the first step in the marketing funnel is the very top, and that's the awareness funnel. We have to build that awareness in our backyards. And right now, ham clubs are mostly just focused on internal stuff and not communicating outward to people that they're trying to pull in and attract. And that's a fundamental shift I think that ham clubs have to make if they're going to be self-sustainable in the future. If you live in an urban area, this is for you. Now, if you live out in the sticks, ignore this one. Skip this chapter. If you have a city where you have lots of general amateur radio clubs, we talk about that, like what's niche, what's amateur, general club. If you live in a city and you have like 10 clubs that are all amateur radio general interest, think about combining forces and consolidating. Now, I know that's really, really, really difficult. There's lots of eccentric personalities, lots of power tripping people that are not going to want to merge, not to mention who takes over the gear and who's going to control and have the say over this and all the politics. But really, I've seen so many areas of this country in major cities where there's 10, 15 clubs and the vast majority are all struggling when they could just consolidate and be stronger together than they would be as separate splinters. Now, if your city's big enough, you probably could benefit from having multiple clubs. But if you consolidate, put some really good machines on the air and have a bigger membership, more dues coming in, that's going to be sustainable. Versus it's like you can either consolidate down to 3, 4, 5 clubs from 15, or you can slowly die off with 15 and eventually you will be down to that number anyways. It's just going to be a slow, painful death to get there. So think about that if you're in an urban area, but that one's really tough to pull off. And I'm going to leave you with one more valuable nugget, and this goes to all the folks that watch this video and are saying, we don't need ham radio clubs anymore. We have the internet and these online communities, and that's where I need to spend my coffee dollars. We surveyed 100 newly licensed hams in the state of Minnesota when we were doing research for MinnesotaHamRadio.com before we launched. In that survey, overwhelmingly, the number one thing people wanted was events. By far, where can I meet face to face and get engaged with this community was like the number one thing by a long shot. Then it was, where are the active repeaters with good conversations? Where are the active clubs that have good membership? Those were like 2 and 3. But it was events. They want to meet up. They want a local network to support them, elmer them, and help them along in this journey. So if you think it's purely an online thing and we don't need ham radio clubs, that's not what new hams are saying, at least not the 100 that we talked to here in Minnesota. So think about this. I'm curious also what you think. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. But I want to hear what you think down in the comments too, because there's lots of good information out there and good ideas from the ham community that maybe you see working in your backyard. Drop a comment down below. Thanks so much for watching. If you're not following me on Twitter, on Instagram, or TikTok, at K0LWC and all of those, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you again next time.